good deed backfires. After noticing a homeless man shivering on the ground outside a Manhattan building one evening in 2021, a 59-year-old resident took the coat off his back and approached the man. As the kind civilian placed the coat across the man's body, 25-year-old Xavier Israel sprang off the ground and brutally attacked him. Israel allegedly threw the victim onto the ground and stole his wallet. The victim tried to get his property back, but was repeatedly punched in the head and thrown back onto the pavement. He eventually managed to overpower Israel and kept him at the scene until police arrived. Israel was charged with robbery, grand larceny, assault, menacing, disorderly conduct, harassment, and criminal possession of stolen property. New York City Mayor Eric Adams, who promised to crack down on the Big Apple's soaring violent crime in his campaign for office, said that the victim did an admirable thing. However, he added that he thinks Israel must also be hurting, and further explained that when you see someone attack someone that helps them, that is a signal people are in pain. It's a sentiment that fewer and fewer people seem to agree with as the number of unprovoked attacks continues to increase, after hitting its highest level in years. In the 2 weeks leading up to Israel's alleged attack on the kind civilian who tried to donate their coat to him, he was arrested for punching a woman who tried to help him and for randomly punching 2 teenagers in Central Park. 9. Christopher Glenn Wright. In the early morning hours of May 31, 2016, police in Mesa, Arizona received several 911 calls from a 41-year-old woman named Nazba Wright. She claimed that she was in a vehicle with her husband, who was armed with a rifle and planned to shoot her. As the dispatch tried to get more details, they heard a scream and several gunshots on the other end of the phone. At the scene, police found Nazba's body on the ground next to a truck. Behind the wheel of a nearby SUV, they found Thomas Ornelas clinging to life with a gunshot wound. Nazba's husband, 38-year-old Christopher Glenn Wright, was also there. Officers ordered him to drop the gun in his hand and took him into custody. Ornelas was rushed to the hospital where he died from his injuries. Detectives later determined that he was a good Samaritan who had seen Nazba running from Wright after he crashed their vehicle in an attempt to kill her. She ran up to Ornelas, who was prepared to help, when he became Wright's second victim. Wright pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder and received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. 8. Johnny Hurley. 59-year-old Ronald Troik from Arvada, Colorado, hated law enforcement, and he wanted them to know it. After sending a threatening letter to the Arvada Police Department in 2021, he shot and killed Officer Gordon Beasley in public one day simply because the man wore a badge. Good Samaritan Johnny Hurley was nearby when the gunfire rang out. The 40-year-old drew his own weapon, which he had a legal permit to carry, and shot Troik. Hurley picked up Troik's rifle to remove the magazine right as responding officers arrived at the scene. When Officer Craig Brownlow saw Hurley with the weapon in his hand, he mistook him for the active shooter and fatally shot him in the back. Hurley did not look similar to Troik, and he was wearing different clothing than the description police received of the shooter's outfit. But an internal investigation found Brownlow acted according to the department's protocol. He resigned from his position in good standing and was not criminally charged. Hurley's mother, Kathleen Bolin, filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Brownlow and Arvada Police Chief Link Strait. The suit alleges that the defendants should have known that Hurley wasn't the active shooter and accuses several police officers of cowering, hiding, and choosing self-preservation over defense of the civilian population. The case is currently ongoing. 7. Lloyd Muldrow. Marine veteran Lloyd Muldrow traveled from Virginia to Baltimore to spend the 4th of July 2022 with his friend, Marshall Cullens. When the 57-year-old entered the bar they agreed to meet at, he saw the Cullens had been shot in the head, and a man was pistol whipping him. Muldrow pinned the attacker to the ground and held him there until police arrived. The moment officers were on the scene, Muldrow told them that he had a concealed pistol in a hip holster. They removed the weapon and thanked Muldrow for stepping in and stopping the man who was trying to murder his friend. When a lieutenant arrived and learned that Muldrow had a concealed carry permit in Virginia, but not Maryland, he told the other officers to arrest the Good Samaritan. Muldrow was charged with bringing a gun within 100 feet, 30 meters of a dwelling. He sat in jail for 18 hours before he was freed and has refused to take a plea deal in the case. His attorney, Michael Stark, described Muldrow as a respected, church-going civilian, veteran, self-defense instructor, and youth mentor. Stark claimed that the gun laws his client was charged under were outdated and had the effect of punishing a hero. If convicted, Muldrow could face a $1,000 fine and up to a year in prison, and he could lose his license to carry a concealed handgun. On a positive note, the suspected gunman, Wesley Henderson, was charged for his alleged crimes against Cullens. 6. Britney Merck. Britney Merck was out celebrating Boxing Day with some girlfriends in Newcastle, Australia in 2015, when a man threw a fist at her roommate's head. According to the women's version of events, he had allegedly been harassing them earlier that night and had spat on Britney before turning his aggressions toward her roommate. The 22-year-old later said that she stepped in to try stopping the assault on her friend and was knocked out cold by the man, who was later identified as 26-year-old Sean Rudder. Merrick remembered hearing her friend scream in fear right before her head hit the ground. When she came to, she could feel that her skin was wet with blood, but she couldn't open her eyes. She was taken to the hospital, where she received treatment for her injuries, and Rudder was charged with 2 counts of assault. In a surprising twist, the judge overseeing the case deemed the victims unreliable and determined that Rudder had acted in self-defense. After spending 8 months in custody, the suspect was acquitted of all charges. The verdict was a far cry from justice in the eyes of many, who had grown to see Britney as a symbol in the campaign to end violence against women. However, there are at least 2 sides to every story, and the judge based his decision on surveillance footage of the encounter, which reportedly showed Merrick grabbing Rudder by the throat and taking him to the ground before he spat on her. 5. Adrien Payne. Former Michigan State basketball star Adrien Payne and his girlfriend visited the Orlando home of Lawrence Doherty in 2022 at the request of the man's girlfriend, Tatiana Mesa. Doherty and Mesa had a volatile relationship, and Mesa had reportedly called Payne's girlfriend that night to intervene in a fight that the couple was having, which she had done several times in the past. Payne and Doherty got into a verbal altercation outside the home, which quickly turned violent. Only the people who were there know exactly what happened next, but it ended with Doherty fatally shooting Payne and being arrested for murder. Doherty initially called 911 and claimed he was the victim of a home invasion. He later told police that he was afraid of Payne, who stood more than a foot, 0.3 meters, taller than him, at 6 feet, 1.8 meters, 10 inches, 25 centimeters, and claimed that the victim made a gesture that resembled reaching for a gun. According to Doherty's version of events, he reacted to the perceived threat by going into his house, grabbing his own weapon, and shooting Payne under the belief that his life was in imminent danger. Authorities found no evidence that Payne was armed during the confrontation, and his girlfriend claimed that he had no plans to hurt Doherty. She said that she and Payne had gone there to try peacefully mediating the disagreement between Doherty and his girlfriend. A witness told detectives that Payne didn't make any threatening gestures before Doherty shot him. The suspect faces a first-degree murder charge and continues to maintain his innocence in the case. 4. Roland Houston. On New Year's Day in 2022, a group of teens brutally beat a man and shoved him onto the tracks at a Bronx subway station. 36-year-old Roland Houston risked his own life in an attempt to rescue the victim. An approaching train fatally struck the vigilant bystander right as he jumped down into the tracks. The assault victim survived and was treated for a broken arm, but was left with other injuries, including lacerations and swelling to his face. 4 suspects were arrested in the months following the assault. They faced charges related to both the attack on the survivor and Houston's death, including manslaughter, robbery, and assault. One of the young men reportedly told police that they saw a gun sticking out of the assault victim's fanny pack, so they bear-hugged him and chased him down the platform. He managed to free himself, so the group pinned him to the floor again, took his fanny pack, and threw it on the platform. The suspect then conveniently claimed that he never saw the gun again. Authorities have not specified whether the victim was really armed, but they did state that a witness saw one of the suspects flash a knife shortly before the attack. Houston's family was devastated by his death, and the mother of the man who survived said that her heart broke for his loved ones in the wake of the senseless tragedy. 3. Surprise carjacking. In 2021, Julissa Guara Reyes was driving home around 2:00 a.m. one morning in Worcester, Massachusetts, when she noticed a vehicle that had crashed into the concrete base of a business sign. She pulled over to help and left her keys in the ignition as she walked over to the disabled car to see what was going on. A man got out of the crashed vehicle, ran over to Reyes's car, and got into the driver's seat. In a shocking struggle that was captured on surveillance footage, he punched her several times as she attempted to fight him off. Luckily, she managed to pull her keys out of the ignition before her attacker could drive off. When he heard the police coming, the man fled the scene on foot. Authorities identified the suspect as 40-year-old William Vassbinder. They caught up with him shortly after the scuffle and charged him with assault and battery, carjacking, leaving the scene of property damage, using a motor vehicle without authority, and operating a vehicle without a license. Reyes told local station WHDH that she was determined not to let Vassbinder drive off in her car. She said she put him in a headlock during the fight to protect her property, and that she was still in shock over the whole incident as she tried to process what happened. 2. Rob Sedin. When a teenager driver crashed their car into a parked caravan along Australia's Central Coast one night in 2022, local resident Rob Sedin rushed outside to help. The 63-year-old, who's trained in first aid, was among several neighbors who were assisting in the 17-year-old's rescue when a group of men attacked them. Sedin was struck from behind and fell backwards as he lost consciousness, and his 21-year-old son suffered a broken nose. Emergency responders flew Sedin to the hospital. He was in a coma and was taken to the intensive care unit. He suffered serious brain injuries and has undergone surgery to relieve the swelling. According to a crowdfunding campaign for help with Sedin's medical bills, the extent of the damage is unclear. His condition has only improved to a point where he's slightly conscious but not responding much. Sedin's family has pleaded with law enforcement to jail the suspects, who have reportedly been identified but have not been charged. 1. Mark Sacket. When he noticed a man trying to kick in the door of Tony Baloney's Cafe and Deli in San Francisco one day in 2021, neighboring business owner Mark Sacket called 911. Then he and some neighbors, including Tony Baloney, started following the man because they wanted to be able to point him out to the police. The man quickly became violent and started swinging a knife at the group. Sacket was hospitalized with serious injuries to his wrist. and has undergone several surgeries to repair nerve damage. Nearly a year after the attack, he still faces a long road to healing. In defiance, Sacket has turned to Twitter to raise awareness about the unaddressed problems that seem to be plaguing San Francisco. He wrote in a post that he faces $145,000 in medical bills, and that his attacker is about to be let off the hook under what he described as a failed system. Shortly after the attack on Sacket, Tony Baloney told NBC News that he's been in the area for about 30 years, but that he's about to sell and run away at this point. He explained that theft, vandalism, violence, and drug activity have become a daily part of life ever since the pandemic began. In August of 2022, the Daily Mail reported that business owners have threatened to withhold their taxes if authorities don't crack down on crime and clean up the city's streets.
Number 11. Philip Frank Panika III and Chloe Scordianos. The high roller Ferris wheel is known as the happiest half hour in Las Vegas. It certainly lived up to its name for 27-year-old Philip Frank Panika III and 21-year-old Chloe Scordianos, who were caught getting frisky on the ride in 2016. The tourists, who were in town from Texas and New York and were riding alone in one of the enclosed glass cabins when staff members noticed that they didn't have their clothes on. Using the intercom, workers instructed the pair to get dressed several times, but Panika and Scordianos reportedly ignored the commands while enjoying a post-romp cigarette. They continued to go at it, even after riders in other cabins began recording the risque encounter on their phones. The duo were also captured on surveillance footage. They were arrested for their behavior, but a judge set a court date in hopes of resolving the matter without going to trial. In the meantime, the tabloid show Inside Edition paid Panika $4,000 for an interview, and he wasn't shy about showing off the money. However, the ordeal would soon become the least of the couple's problems. Just a month after the incident, Panika was shot dead in a robbery and carjacking in Houston. According to court documents, the Ferris wheel incident set the stage for the murder. Prosecutors alleged that the accused killers, Bryant Christopher Watts and Aaron Jones, may have been tempted to commit the crime after seeing Panika bragging about his payout from Inside Edition. Watts was convicted of murder and received a 15-year prison sentence. The outcome of the case against Jones is unclear, but it's safe to assume that he paid a price for his role in the crime as well. Number 10. Brandon Wright. In what can only be described as a classic Florida man story, Volusia County deputies had their hands full one morning in 2022 when they received a call about a naked man wielding a machete and trying to steal another man's clothing. When they arrived at the scene, a surveyor who was working in the area said that the suspect had approached him in a wooded area with a machete in hand and demanded his clothes, wallet, and phone. The surveyor followed the orders, but the madman threw the machete at him, causing it to bounce off his chest, and then ran away. He fled the scene in a car, but luckily the surveyor was uninjured. Police began tracking the suspect, 34-year-old Brandon Wright, after his car drove through a license plate reader in the area. Just a few minutes later, they received a call about a naked man outside a gas station. A patrol helicopter kept tabs on Wright's location, while officers on the ground scrambled to catch up with him. At one point during the chase, an officer in the helicopter remarked that the suspect was yelling at people in the parking lot and very animated. Footage from the chopper then showed Wright walking away from the gas station and into traffic. He then went back to the gas station, did some push-ups near the entrance, and then laid on the ground while officers took him into custody. This wasn't the first time Wright was arrested for acting bizarre in public while naked. About a year earlier, he was caught unclothed and running in the same area. His most recent charges of attempted robbery, aggravated battery, and aggravated assault with a deadly weapon only add to an extensive list of previous charges. He's also been arrested for false imprisonment, possession of cocaine, and battery on a law enforcement officer. Number 9. Brandy Duxbury and Mandy Rugaber. Two New York women in their late 30s were allegedly caught pool hopping in 2022 when they were found trespassing on a private property in Ocean City, Maryland. The pair, later identified as 37-year-old Brandy Duxbury and 40-year-old Mandy Rugaber, could be heard laughing and yelling all the way from the road, according to police reports. Officers showed up to find the women by a pool behind an apartment building. Local Dispatch newspaper reported that there was a lock on the gate surrounding the pool, along with signs stating no trespassing and pool pass required. When officers asked the suspects how they got into the pool area, the completely naked Duxbury reportedly said they hopped over the fence. A resident who came outside to see what was going on gave the police their access card for the pool area so that they could deal with the unauthorized guests. As police entered the area, Duxbury jumped back into the pool and became uncooperative. They eventually managed to take her into custody, wearing a makeshift covering made from a police poncho. In the meantime, Rugaber allegedly yelled obscenities at the police. Both women were charged with a long list of crimes, including indecent exposure, trespassing, disorderly conduct, and obstructing and hindering. Number 8. Michael Matheson and Lauren Wilder. Getting intimate on Ferris wheels is apparently a popular form of indecent exposure based on how often it happens. In early 2019, 30-year-old Michael Matheson and 31-year-old Lauren Wilder were taken into custody after Cincinnati police received reports of the pair getting frisky on the city's 150-foot, 46-meter Sky Star observation wheel. Authorities accused the couple of doing it without a care in the world about who might be watching, including families with young children. Matheson and Wilder pleaded guilty to disorderly conduct while intoxicated in exchange for getting the public indecency charges dropped. Wilder received an 8-month probation sentence, while Matheson was sentenced to 1 day in jail. Another couple was accused of copulating on an Ohio Ferris wheel in 2022, this time at the Cedar Point Amusement Park in Sandusky. Fellow park-goers spotted David Davis and Heather Johnson in the midst of the naughty act just after dark and told police that the couple laughed off their concerns. However, they most likely weren't laughing when officers showed up. Davis and Johnson initially denied that they were doing anything inappropriate on the ride, despite an entire group of people reporting otherwise. The pair initially claimed that Ms. Johnson had bent over to pick up a pack of cigarettes she had dropped on the floor of their cabin. They changed their story, though, and owned up to the dirty deed after police told them that some of the spectators were a little too young to see that kind of behavior. Due to the ages of some of the witnesses, the suspects face heightened charges and are facing up to 180 days in jail. Number 7. Aaron Thomas and Megan Mondanaro. After being arrested in 2019 for cycling under the influence in Florida, a couple decided to get it on in the back of a squad car. One encounter with the police is usually enough for most people to be on their best behavior. However, Megan Mondanaro and Aaron Thomas couldn't even wait until they were released from custody to get back to their shenanigans. It all started when police observed that the pair had no lights on their bikes and were swerving in and out of traffic in the middle of the night. Officers noticed that they smelled like alcohol and they failed roadside sobriety tests. The arresting officer was outside of the car and standing nearby when they disrobed and started to go at it. When the officer opened the door to stop them, Thomas was already completely undressed and Mondanaro was half naked. After being pulled from the vehicle, Thomas attempted to flee on foot but was quickly apprehended behind a nearby ice cream parlor. Both suspects were charged with DUI, exposing themselves, as well as unnatural and lascivious acts. Number 6. Michael Nean. When San Francisco police were called to a luxury apartment building regarding suspected vandalism in October of 2022, they didn't expect to find the building flooded by a naked man. They were summoned to the scene after a fire alarm went off in the high-rise. After figuring out the problem was coming from the 11th floor, officers discovered the unclothed suspect standing next to a pipe that was gushing water. They then shut the water off and detained the suspect. The man was identified as 46-year-old Michael Nean, a resident of the building, and charged him with felony vandalism and resisting arrest. The water had flooded several floors below the open pipe, leaving many people's homes severely damaged. Twitter user Wagnerian posted photos of the incident showing a literal waterfall pouring down a staircase and what looks like several inches of water in a hallway. Number 5. Kira Welsh. During his routine patrol one night in September of 2022, a police officer spotted a half-naked woman hanging out the passenger side window of a car and firing a gun in a populated area of downtown Memphis, Tennessee. He called for backup and pulled the vehicle over. The underdressed woman, who was identified as Kira Welsh, said that she was just turning up for her 23rd birthday, which happened to be about a month earlier. According to an arrest affidavit, she admitted to drinking at least 4 alcoholic beverages and was clearly intoxicated and smiling and laughing the entire time. Officers also found a bag of weed and a Glock on the floor of the car. The gun belonged to the suspect's boyfriend, who was driving during the out-of-control display. Interestingly enough, Welsh managed to avoid an indecent exposure charge, but was hit with 1 count of having a handgun while intoxicated. She was also charged with reckless endangerment with a deadly weapon and possession of marijuana. She's free on a $7,500 bond while the case works its way through the court system. Number 4. Eric and Lori Harmon. Eric and Lori Harmon didn't initially get into any trouble when they did the deed in a glass gondola while riding the 187-foot, 57-meter sky wheel in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. However, when a clip of the act surfaced on an adult website in 2021, law enforcement took the situation seriously. In addition to the Ferris wheel incident, detectives also found footage of the pair being intimate in a community pool and on a bench near a playground. The Harmons were arrested at least twice in 1 month for lewdness after investigators figured out their identities and tracked them down. Eric and Lori pleaded guilty to indecent exposure, and they both received 2 years of probation for the first batch of inappropriate acts. Although it seemed the couple just couldn't stop themselves from doing it in public and got arrested yet again several months later. This time they were caught getting frisky in a public photo booth at an arcade. At their previous sentencing, the judge had told the pair that they could face jail time if they violated their probation, but it's unclear whether they ended up behind bars for their most recent charges. Number 3. Tyler Davis French. A man living in Deweyville, Texas, awoke to an unpleasant surprise one morning in October 2022 when he discovered a naked man in his house who was trying to steal his cat. The homeowner dialed 911 and said that he shot the intruder, who was later identified as 21-year-old Tyler Davis French. The bullet missed all the major organs and only grazed the man's right forearm. French ran from the scene and was apprehended nearby after a Newton County deputy arrived in the area. He received medical treatment for his bullet wound and was then hauled off to jail. The suspect was charged with burglary and evading arrest and was held on bonds totaling over $100,000. While the homeowner may have fallen under heavy scrutiny in some states for his decision to fire his gun at French, Texas gun laws are pretty generous when it comes to a person's right to defend their home. In the end, the homeowner was cleared of any wrongdoing. Number 2. Juan Alfaro Rodriguez. During the summer and fall of 2022, numerous victims reported being assaulted or flashed by a partially naked man along the Washington and Old Dominion Trail in Fairfax County, Virginia. Police received disturbing complaints about the behavior for 2 months before they finally arrested 42-year-old Juan Alfaro Rodriguez. During their investigation, authorities found evidence linking the suspect to numerous other incidents in the area and elsewhere. They charged Rodriguez in connection with 20 indecent exposure cases in Fairfax County alone. Detectives also discovered that he had an outstanding warrant in Suffolk County in Long Island, New York, for allegedly attacking a jogger in 2021. He was also wanted by U.S. Marshals as an out-of-state fugitive. Rodriguez is being held without bail, much to the relief of women who live in the areas he's known to frequent. He's now facing both state and federal charges. Number 1. Alyssa Esamia. Police in McAllen, Texas received some unusual complaints in late 2022 when several library patrons and staff members called to report a woman taking nude photos in the bathroom. People also claimed that the suspect was yelling and slamming doors. When officers arrived at the scene, they were told that the woman, later identified as Alyssa Esamia, was talking on the phone and taking photos in the bathroom while only wearing a thong. An employee said that this was the second time they had caught her in the lavatory without her clothes on. After the first incident, Esamia complied with the staff member's command to leave the library. However, this time she got confrontational and aggressive and began yelling. Fearing that the interaction would escalate into physical violence, the worker left the bathroom and called 911. Police found some pills on the suspect and also discovered she was wanted for assault. Esamia was charged with indecent exposure, assault causing bodily injury, and possession of a dangerous drug.
Number 10. Robert Modley. Robert Modley is 68 years old. He has been locked in a literal glass box since 1979. That's 43 years. He was given a life sentence in prison for the brutal murder of John Farrell back in 1974. But once he got locked up, Robert went on a murdering spree. He began to kill other inmates as he carried out his own brand of twisted vigilante justice. Robert is considered by some to be a kind of hero, while to others, he's just a murdering monster. He killed David Francis and William Roberts, men convicted of crimes against children and minors. And he murdered Sally Darwood, who was sent to jail for murdering his wife. Robert refused to stop killing people, so he had to be placed in solitary confinement. He was imprisoned in a glass box and has been there ever since. Despite these circumstances, Robert claims to be happy living in his tiny prison, and has warned prison workers that if he's ever allowed into the general population, he will definitely kill again. He considers himself as a Batman-type figure, and wants nothing more than to dispose of the people in jail he considers scum. Because of this, Robert continues to live 23 hours each day, totally isolated in his glass cell. Number 9. Juan Baron. A 23-year-old Hawaiian man named Juan Baron is currently in jail after his confession in early 2022 for murdering his lover. Juan is an evil person. He killed his older partner in an unbelievably brutal way. It all started when 73-year-old Gary Ruby was found in March in a cement-filled bathtub. He was inside his house in Honolulu, a property estimated to be worth over $2 million. After a brief investigation, the police put the pieces together and figured out what really happened. Juan and Gary had been in a romantic relationship. They had been together intimately, but Gary was hiding something from Juan. He had HIV and didn't tell Juan until after they had sex. Juan got angry after finding out. He strangled his lover with a belt until he couldn't breathe. Juan then tried to cover up the murder by encasing Gary's body in cement inside of the bathtub. He even emptied buckets of coffee grinds over the corpse to try and mask the rotting smell. After this, Juan fled Hawaii, made it to Los Angeles, and tried to escape to Mexico when he was finally arrested by authorities. Number 8. Matthew Reynolds. Matthew Reynolds is currently completing a 14-year sentence in jail for manslaughter. He's described as an evil amateur beekeeper. He's a man who stabbed a woman to death for no reason, besides getting cash and crack cocaine. It all went down in Alton in the UK, early in the morning last year on October 10th. Matthew knew his victim, Bonnie Harwood, since he was just a boy. He even went camping with her when he was younger. But by the time the amateur beekeeper turned 14, he had gotten involved with heavy drugs. He continued using them all the way into adulthood, when he somehow managed to get himself a gig as a beekeeper, selling hives and honey. Sadly for his victim, beekeeping didn't bring in quite enough cash to feed a crack addiction. Matthew went to the home of his childhood friend, stabbed Bonnie multiple times, and stole all her money. He then left her on the floor, bleeding to death. The 32-year-old man has since been charged with manslaughter and put behind bars. and he won't even have a chance of getting out until he's 46. During the sentencing, the judge called him cunning, manipulative, and devoid of remorse. Sounds about right. Number 7. Jeremy Bamber. Jeremy Bamber has been locked away since 1985. He's considered one of the evilest prisoners in all of Britain. He was the one behind the White House farm murders, where he slaughtered his own parents as part of a sick plot to steal their inheritance. Jeremy was born in 1961 in Kensington. He was put up for adoption, then taken in by Neville and June Bamber. They were a wildly wealthy couple who wanted to buy a baby instead of giving birth naturally. They took in Jeremy when he was only 6 months old. He attended a private school, had all the greatest privileges and advantages in life, and even traveled around Australia and New Zealand for free after finishing school. But for some reason, Jeremy couldn't get the bad out of him. While traveling the world on his parents' dime, he was caught breaking into a jewelry shop and stealing watches. He also supposedly smuggled heroin overseas, forcing him to flee New Zealand after getting involved in an armed robbery. When he went back to England, Jeremy robbed the family business, then killed them all. On the night of August 6, 1985, Jeremy shot his adopted parents in their farmhouse. He also killed his adopted sibling, a non-biological sister, Sheila Caffel. He gunned down her and her twin sons, who were only 6 years old. He was hoping that by wiping every family member out, he would be the only one alive to inherit their fortune and be filthy rich. But Jeremy was caught. He was sent to prison, given a life sentence, and will likely die behind bars. Number 6. Rosemary West. Rosemary West is, without a doubt, one of the evilest women currently doing time in prison. She was a serial killer who worked with her husband Fred West. Together, they're directly responsible for the torture and murder of 9 young women. She and Fred went on a killing spree that lasted from 1973 to 1987. Not only did Rosemary kill strangers after barbarically torturing them in the worst ways imaginable, but she killed her own stepdaughter first in 1971. The story of Rosemary is as disturbing as you could imagine. She met Fred in early 1969, just after her 15th birthday. When the pair met, Fred was already well into adulthood at 27. Within weeks after meeting, the two had gotten together and were in a solid relationship, despite Rosemary's parents threatening to call social services and the police on Fred. Well, it went wrong very quickly. After her parents got help from the police, their daughter was taken away and put in a home for troubled teens. On her 16th birthday, she ran away with Fred, and shortly after, the murders began. Fred had gone to jail for a brief 6 months in 1971. While he was there, Rosemary looked after their newly born daughter and Charmaine, Fred's daughter, from a previous relationship. But before he got out, Rosemary killed Charmaine. Then she murdered Fred's ex-wife. After this, the couple still got married, dipped into prostitution, and went on to abuse all 5 of their children until they were taken to foster homes. While all this was happening, they were also murdering people. Finally, in 1995, Rosemary West was convicted of 10 murders. She's currently an inmate at the HM Prison Newhall, where she will remain for the rest of her life. Number 5. Monique Osuna. Monique Osuna is an evil woman that's currently spending her life in prison for the murder of Emmerich Osuna. Emmerich was Monique's stepson, who was only 9 years old when she killed him on September 2nd, 2020. According to the Aden County Prosecutor's Office, Monique inflicted both physical and emotional abuse on Emmerich, which included beating the boy, starving him, and forcing him to do physical exercise until he couldn't stand. The district judge, Stephen Hippler, called Monique a sadistic, heartless, and evil woman. He gave her a life sentence, plus a 100-year no-contact order for her surviving children. Monique never even wanted a stepson. Emmerich only went to live with her because she was with his biological father, Eric Osuna. The child left a severely toxic environment involving his biological mother in February 2018, only to be put in an even worse situation. his mother had been convicted of severely torturing Emmerich and his infant siblings. But once he moved in with Monique, things got even worse. His cause of death was prolonged torture. The poor child died from a mixture of physical exertion, starvation, and general abuse. Monique will never get out of jail and will suffer the rest of her life for the evil crime she committed against that innocent young boy. Number 4. Christopher Halliwell. Christopher Halliwell is currently serving a life sentence for the savage killing of Sean O'Callaghan and Becky Godden-Edwards, 2 girls in their 20s who were abducted after a night-out clubbing in Swindon, the UK. Sean went missing on March 19, 2011. She left the club, got picked up by a taxi driver, Christopher Halliwell, and was then taken to a forested area and killed. Several years earlier, Christopher had done something similar to Becky Godden-Edwards, only he removed the woman's head and arms before burying her body. After all these years, her skull still hasn't been found. Christopher had gotten away with the first murder, but was arrested just days after killing Sean. But what's really crazy is that new information makes it seem like Christopher may have actually murdered dozens of women across the United Kingdom over a span of 20 years. The police allegedly found a secret stash of women's clothing with his belongings after Christopher was arrested. These clothes might belong to over a dozen women that have been missing for years, women whose bodies wound up naked and mutilated in waterways, ditches, and forested areas around the UK. If these accusations are true, Christopher would be one of the worst serial killers in human history. But as of right now, it's only speculation. The police don't actually seem to be doing anything to tie Christopher to these other cold cases. Number 3. Nikki Capello. Nikki Capello is serving a life sentence in prison for poisoning her husband. Nikki was a registered nurse married to a man named Jim. He was a pretty well-known private investigator in the local community of Huntsville, Alabama. He knew the police, so he was not the kind of person that could go missing without being noticed. But Jim did go missing in September 2018, but his body was found shortly after, dead, from insulin poisoning. After he didn't show up to work on September 21st, his co-workers went straight to his house. When they knocked on the door, Nikki answered but refused to let them inside. That's because his body was decomposing on a tarp in the garage, and she didn't want them to see. The stink of his death was so overpowering, though, that his co-workers could smell it without even going inside. The police went to the home, and they could also smell the corpse, but Nikki wouldn't let them in. Finally, the Huntsville police got a search warrant and discovered Jim wrapped in the stinky tarp. Nikki was quickly arrested and charged with murder. Investigators found a bottle of insulin that had been used to give Jim a fatal dose. Plus, Nikki's friend showed the police text messages from September 22nd, when Nikki had asked for help moving the body of her husband. During the sentencing, prosecutor Tim Duffitt told local news that it's surprisingly rare for him to run into a truly evil person. But Nikki is one of those people, an unrepentantly evil woman. Number 2. Arthur Hitchinson. Arthur Hitchinson is a convicted triple murderer. He was born in England in 1941 and gained worldwide recognition in 1984 following his conviction. But Arthur's evil showed up even before he started killing people in 1983. He'd already spent over 5 years in prison following the attempted murder of his half-brother, Dino. Shortly after he was released, he was arrested again on September 28, 1983. He was taken to the Selby police station on suspicion of theft, burglary, and assault on a woman. When he was in the bathroom, he managed to crawl out of a window and escape. He went on the run, and that's when the murder started. On October 23rd, Arthur broke into the home of Basil and Avril Leitner, a married couple in their 50s. Their son was also home, a 28-year-old patio cleaner named Richard. Arthur stabbed all 3 of them to death, then brutally tortured their 18-year-old daughter, Nicola, before running away. Arthur remained on the run for another 2 weeks before he was eventually caught hiding out on a farm. Arthur was found guilty on all 3 charges of murder and sentenced to life in prison. He's made several legal challenges to overturn his ruling, but remains firmly locked up for his crimes. Number 1. Stephen Port. Stephen Port is one of the only serial killers in British history who's been given a life sentence with something called a whole life order. This means that not only is he sentenced to spend the rest of his life in prison, but he's never allowed to get out for any kind of reason or technicality. He was sentenced on November 25, 2016, after being found guilty for 4 counts of murder. Stephen Port is also known as the Grindr Killer. He used the Grindr app to connect with his victims. Grindr is kind of like Tinder for men seeking men. He created false accounts to trick his targets, pretended to be a graduate of Oxford University, said he served in the Royal Navy, and even claimed to be a special needs teacher. Once Stephen was able to organize a time and a place to meet these guys, he would show up and knock them out with something like GHB or roofies. GHB is gamma-hydroxybutyric acid and is the preferred drug for many serial killers and some awful, evil people. Stephen would then bring his victims back to his apartment in Barking, East London, and murder them with a GHB overdose. When he finished, he ditched them basically right next to his apartment. He would simply drag their bodies outside and leave them on the sidewalk. He managed to do this 4 times before police finally realized he was responsible. And even though Stephen denied the charges, he was found guilty anyway. Have you ever visited a prison? Let us know in the comments, and thanks for watching. Remember to hit subscribe and come back soon for another great video. Bye!